Well, hello there. Good day, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Sandeep. I'm our global field CTO here at Nozomi Networks, and we are going to spend the next half an hour or so talking about insider threats. I want to welcome you to our first big webinar of 2025. Happy New Year to everyone. We're here today to talk about insider threats, something that's been around about as long as insiders have been around. I'm sure you're all generally familiar with what they are and the huge risk they pose. But since you're here, you're probably interested in learning about how they differ in industrial settings and what you can do about them. So let's take a moment to observe how rarely we as an ICS cyber community even talk about insider threats. And yet they're perhaps more pervasive and more dangerous than insider threats in a pure IT environment. Not to mention the fact that insider threats tend to be underreported. Let me share a couple of examples that drive this point home. You may be familiar with the first example, as it's quite notorious. It involves a disgruntled ex-employee of a water treatment plant whose credentials were not deactivated. The second example comes from my own personal experiences. So in the first instance, we had an insider cause 800,000 liters of raw sewage to spill out into local parks and rivers. It involved a former employee of the company that installed the control system for the sewage pumps. He'd worked for the company for 2 years, but resigned as a result of a dispute with his boss. He offered his services to the company as an independent contractor, but was denied. He then illegally accessed the control system remotely and caused pumps to malfunction, resulting in a massive sewage spill. The second example involves a bank employee inadvertently bridging the bank's network into a hotel across the street. This employee wanted to do something simple. He just wanted Wi-Fi access in the kitchen area. And again, this example is actually back in the day when everybody had wireless networking at home, but it had yet to come to the office. So this guy was trying to be a little bit forward thinking and implement his own Wi-Fi network, which involved purchasing a commercial home Wi-Fi router and installing it at work. So, I mean, yeah, this guy figured he could do it himself. What's the harm, right? Trying to help out IT. Well, in doing this, he managed to bridge the bank network into a hotel that was across the street on the Wi-Fi network. And in fact, guests of this hotel were getting IP addresses on the bank's network. Needless to say, this did not end well for our fellow bank employee. Insider threats are indeed a factor in ICS security as well. So let's first have a quick recap of what insider threats even are and how they work. Here's a standard definition of an insider threat. Current or former employees, contractors, vendors, or other individuals with legitimate access to systems who cause security incidents. Fairly straightforward. Typically, we probably think of a remote IT or knowledge worker or someone at their desk after hours doing something nefarious. Does this guy look like an insider threat to you? No ski mask, no crowbar. Insider threats look exactly like you and I do. When we talk about insider threats, we tend to worry about the malicious ones, but here's what the data is telling us. Negligent employees and contractors account for more than half of incidents. And when you add in compromised insiders, which you can argue are another flavor of negligent insider, only about a quarter of incidents are maliciously motivated. From a cost perspective, however, there's very different outcomes. So negligent employees or contractors are the root cause of most incidents. We see a little north of 50% of incidents falling into this bucket. And interestingly enough, the average cost per incident is around $485,000 American. The second group are malicious insiders, which account for around a quarter of all incidents. And the cost goes up when a malicious insider is the root cause of a breach. The average cost per incident for a malicious insider is closer to $650,000. And the final bucket or type of insider threat are the compromised insiders, and this is things like credential theft. They do account for a smaller percentage, a little less than 20% of all incidents. However, the average cost per incident from a compromised insider is north of $800,000 US. So significantly different impact depending on how the threat originated. Let's take a closer look at the three types of insider threats that we typically see. Again, these pertain to all networks, including OT networks. So keep that in mind as we move on and how they manifest in industrial environments. The first type of insider threat is a negligent insider. This person is careless, they make a lot of mistakes, their work is prone to human error, and they can inadvertently cause direct harm to organizations or expose the organization to external attacks. The second type of insider threat is a compromised insider. This type of threat will generally be the result of something like stolen credentials or an unwitting insider that's been manipulated by some sort of social engineering or phishing attack. And the point being here is they unknowingly expose the organization to an external attack. The third type of insider threat, and of course the most dangerous, is the malicious threat. This is where we see unusual, unexpected, or unauthorized behavior. There's often misuse of either access or knowledge to inflict damage or disruption to control systems. And these types of threats are generally motivated by personal gain or by vengeance. I'd like to point out that endpoints, things like HMIs, engineering workstations, PLCs, they're at least one of the important attack points, if not the most important attack point for control systems. I mean, if I was an insider wanting to do harm, and my two options were to physically crack a pipe with a sledgehammer or disrupt the operations of an endpoint, I'd be choosing the latter, as A, it gives me the best chance of escaping without being caught or killed, and B, I can probably do more damage that way. If your factory or production environment goes down, that has direct impact on the share price of your organization. If a company mail servers go down, for instance, for an hour or so, there's little to no business impact, and share price doesn't even get touched. However, if your factory or production network gets ransomware, these generally get top visibility, and someone's job is probably on the line. Here's 4 reasons why insider threats in OT networks are more severe than in IT. So first off, in ICS environments, we have a very people-porous landscape. You've got a lot of different people coming and going. There's contractors, vendor technicians, employees. People are generally doing shift work where there's frequent shift changes. It's not uncommon to see new faces and unfamiliar faces. And all you really need is a badge. Number 2 is when we talk about threats to ICS environments, we generally talk about a physical impact versus a data breach. In ICS environments, when we have threats or breaches, they tend to result in things like production downtime, there's equipment damage that can occur, there's often safety consequences. Of course, the time to recover is more critical. And as we saw in one of those first examples, there can be environmental damage. So fairly significant physical impacts versus data breaches, which IT events tend to be centered around. Number 3 would be easy credential theft. It's not uncommon for us to see in OT and IT networks shared credentials. In OT networks, there's a lot of use of default credentials. That's quite common. And of course, the password policies around rolling and reuse of passwords are rarely enforced. So we can see already we're setting ourselves up for some challenges. And the fourth, and in my opinion, the biggest challenge is key vulnerabilities. So generally, insiders have access to sensitive control systems. Further to that, they often have insider knowledge of critical infrastructure weaknesses. Combine this with things like insufficient monitoring and insufficient segmentation, and you can see how it's very easy to end up in a tough situation. So let's talk about some challenges around mitigation. So first off, a lot of mitigation activities are heavyweight and disruptive. When it comes to OT devices, many of these devices have very limited computing power and memory, and they're designed to perform very specific tasks. IT agents typically consume a lot of system resources, and they often require a system reboot, which means downtime. A lot of times when we're trying to mitigate challenges in OT networks, the tools that we're using are simply not trained to look for the right types of behavior and activity. Things like traditional vulnerability scanning and intrusion prevention systems are very well trained to detect IT threats. What they don't do is, number one, look for industrial threats. Number two, they rarely understand industrial communication protocols. And number three is they have a very difficult time recognizing OT baselines. So you can see right away there's a number of challenges in trying to fix these. Another big challenge is false positives. And this is a direct result of these types of tools not being trained in OT environments. IT tools will very often detect false positives in ICS environments. And there's consequences to that. First and foremost, things like flagging of legitimate safety protocols or control system commands. Again, these are generally foreign to a lot of IT tools, and as a result, they trigger a lot of false positives. Number two, even worse, consequences of a false positive can be stopping of a process or deleting a critical application that was perceived as malware, again, which is often incorrect. In rare cases when endpoint sensors have been deployed in OT networks, and I'll get to the many reasons why they haven't been until recently, the EDR and NDR, so endpoint detection and response and network detection and response tools, are generally in separate silos. And until that data meets at something like a SIM, that simply has allowed too much time to pass. As we know, the average SIM correlation time is around 30 to 60 minutes after an event. That's simply too much latency. Analysts have to start stitching different outputs of different tools together and manage it at the SIM, which hopefully gives you enough time to actually stop the threat. Without endpoint security, there's no way to correlate user activity and events. There's no way to know who's plugging in, when, and what they're doing until their commands have been executed on the network. That's generally too late. This has always been a challenge in OT. Passive network monitoring, things like remote collectors, and even intermittent polling are great at spotting communications between workstations and PLCs, but we still have no visibility into who's on the machine. The great thing is, now there are endpoint agents for OT devices, including some embedded agents for PLCs that are purpose-built to overcome these challenges. They don't need to be installed on everything, but you do want to install them where humans interact. On your attackable assets, things like engineering workstations, HMIs, and even some of your ICS hardware. Some of the best use cases for endpoint sensors involve common insider threat scenarios. And you can see these common threat scenarios here. So again, first off, the malicious insider, we talked about this guy. You need to be able to detect intentional changes to HMI set points that are outside of baseline parameters. A second use case is infected third-party laptops, right? Because these are highly transient environments, people are coming and going, you need to be able to detect and mitigate before malware hits your network. A third big use case is simple operator error, right? Being able to catch accidental configuration changes by, for instance, a newly hired engineer or employee. And finally, the strongest use case is around stolen credentials. We need to be able to correlate when and on what machine a user's credentials were breached, for instance, when they log in from thousands of miles away. We've got tools that can help us do this now. Here are some typical strategies that can be used in ICS environments to detect insider threats. Some of these are more effective than others. And of course, the more of them you deploy together, the better they protect you. So normally the first control is physical access control, where the standard barrier is badges. But since we're talking about insiders who by definition all have badges, um, this is not the place you want to really hang your hat. We really need to discount this or simply acknowledge that there's not much help here. Our first real line of defense is digital access and credential controls. You want rigorous enforcement of role-based access control that extends to remote access for vendors and contractors. And then you want to ensure that these people only have access to what they need to work on. Another challenge is around the use of default manufacturer credentials, right? This is rampant in ICS. And even if they aren't changed, insiders often know the passwords. Another line of defense is real-time network monitoring and threat detection. These are crucial, especially for detecting insider threats. Another control is OT endpoint monitoring, which we just covered. The important thing here is it has to be purpose-built for OT. Now, suppose you have OT network monitoring and OT endpoint monitoring running in parallel, but separate silos. Again, waiting for detections to meet and to be correlated at the SIM is too late. These types of tools have to work together in real time to provide defense in depth. Another great one is segmentation, likely following the Purdue model, but you also want to be able to visualize your network traffic, including segmentation, so that you can do things like confirm your segmentation policies are working as designed. On top of that, you need AI-driven behavioral analytics to detect anomalies in insider activity. Finally, OT-specific incident response plans. Your InfoSec team likely has a solid IR plan for insider threats on the IT side, but how many of you are confident that they exist on the operational side? What's the plan if a malicious employee or contractor just compromised a PLC or an HMI? You need to create tailored incident response plans specifically for your OT environments that include steps to ensure rapid identification and containment of insider breaches. I know we're almost to the end of this deck, but it's worth raising a taboo subject in OT here, which is automated response actions. Couple ubiquitous network convergence with the increasing number and sophistication of threats targeting industrial and critical infrastructure. And I believe that in 1 to 2 years, we're not going to be talking about whether or not it's safe to automate response actions, but the best practice will simply be to do so. We've got some key takeaways, and a lot of this we've heard already. So number one, ICS insider threats are real. These are happening, and the consequences are often greater than when we see them on the IT side. The second big takeaway, which we've talked about several times, is that ICS-specific problems require ICS-specific solutions. And these solutions need to be guaranteed not to cause any disruption, right? Downtime costs money, and there's much more serious impacts if things start to go down inadvertently. We've got a number of organizations that leverage us for security, and it's not uncommon for an unplanned shutdown to take 1 month or more to get systems back online. And as you can imagine, that's catastrophic to a lot of organizations. The third big takeaway is that network and endpoint detection is critical. We need to be able to correlate user activity with device activity. And until you can do those two things simultaneously, it's going to be very difficult to pinpoint insider threats and understand exactly who the insider threat came from. So with that being said, I'd like to thank you very much for your time today. This is a nice, quick one, easy to ingest for the beginning of the year. We didn't want to overwhelm you too much. I hope you folks found this informative. And at this point, I'm just going to stop sharing and flip over to our QA section. If you do have any questions from this presentation, please feel free to type them into the questions section of the Zoom. And I'm going to be reviewing those now and see what we've got there. So can these slides be shared? Yes, absolutely. This video is being recorded and it will be distributed down the road. I would assume you can find this on YouTube. in the coming days. And on top of that, we can share this deck with you. Please reach out to anyone from Nozomi. Be more than happy to help you. All right, we do have another question here. I prefer the term insecure as designed or insecure by design. Insecure by design seems to imply that the device was purposely designed to be insecure when security may simply have not been a concern at that time. Absolutely great point, Marcus. And that's a big challenge that we run into. A lot of devices we see out there in the OT world, as you're very well aware, these are legacy devices. It's not uncommon for us to walk into an organization and find them working with infrastructure and industrial devices that are 10, 20, 25 years old, in fact. And you're absolutely correct. Back in the day, when these devices were first introduced to market, there was little to no concern about security. It wasn't even thought about. The good news, dovetailing on your comment, is that in recent generations of devices, controllers, HMIs, vendors in general are definitely starting to pay attention to cybersecurity now. And we're seeing a lot more security wrapped around these devices, whether it's encrypted protocols or vendor-specific implementations of insecure protocols, excuse me. But yeah, absolutely great point. Good takeaway there. Sometimes we're working with legacy equipment that on its own can't be patched, so now we have to start looking at controls to place around that. Great question. Thank you. Next question here we've got, excuse me. The data collected is from internal agents, from Michael. I'm not sure I 100% understand the context of your question, Michael, but I think what you're getting at is when we're talking about gathering data, gathering information from network detection tools and endpoint detection tools, on the endpoint detection side, yes, data is collected from internal agents. We talked about the embedded agent. We talked about other OT device agents. Those are generally sending telemetry and data straight up into the rest of an ecosystem to allow for that bigger picture visibility. Great question. Please type something else in if I missed the point on that one, but thank you for asking. All right, Mike seems to be leading the pack with questions today. Can you see breached OT devices through an external means with no agent installed? Can you see breached OT devices? Okay, I have to wrap my head around that for a second. The answer is yes. Even if you're not using an endpoint-based detection tool, generally we can pick up these type of breaches from the network. A lot of network-based detections, like that example we talked about, start with things like remote access. So as soon as packets start hitting the network and heading towards industrial devices, absolutely, we can see those. There are some other use cases where it might be more difficult to understand those breaches. Like for instance, someone sat down in front of a machine, they were able to gain physical access all the way through into a control center and sit down at a machine so that there was no network infiltration. But again, that's where we need to leverage both types of technologies so we can cover off all gaps. Thank you, Mike. Next question here. Can your endpoint sensor actually in terms of power grid, how these used in power systems, what measures should we take? Awesome question. So I do a lot of work with utilities right now, power generation, power distribution, power transmission. And this is a huge use case for them. We often run into environments, again, we talked about legacy equipment. It's not only legacy OT devices that sometimes we're working with, but we've got to deal with legacy networking infrastructure. So a lot of things like network detection tools rely on advanced networking technologies, things like SPAN, RSPAN, ERSPAN. So in the case where we're working with a client who is unable to provide us with the network traffic we need, we have great buy-in from utilities with installing some sort of sensor on the endpoint to allow us to get this visibility. Yeah, I hope I got that question right. I'm trying to read between the lines here, but again, if I missed the mark, please type something in again and I'll see if I can answer that a little bit better. Do you see OT vendors reaching out to security vendors such as Nozomi to fix their issues? Rocky, fantastic question. So the answer to that is yes. So companies specifically like Nozomi, I'll talk about us, we are what's called a CNA. We are a CVE naming authority. So you can actually go on our website and you can find our threat advisories that we as an organization issue. And last year, I need to figure out the exact count, but when I stopped counting last year, I think we were north of 300 zero-day vulnerabilities that we discovered, either through protocol breaches or device breaches or reverse engineering hardware to find vulnerabilities. So in that case, it's kind of the opposite flow. When we detect a vulnerability or a zero-day event with a piece of hardware, we participate in responsible disclosure. So we are generally reaching out to those vendors, OT vendors, OEM vendors, and informing them before we release these CDEs to the public. It also works the other way, where we've got a number of OEM vendors that we have extremely strong partnerships with, excuse me, and we proactively communicate with them. They reach out to us and let us know that, hey, we're releasing a new version of software, we're releasing a new type of device. Can you guys take this in your lab? Can you reverse engineer it and tell us what we need to know in terms of mitigating or patching any vulnerabilities? So it's very much a two-way street. And that's part of what gives us our strength and our reputation in the industry. Absolutely, we are very transparent with the OT vendors that we work with, and those ones that we have established relationships with often are very transparent back with us. Super question. Thank you very much. And I see, I think, Aaron from marketing is popping some links into the chat. So please feel free to take a click there. Thank you again, Rocky. Great question. All right, next question here. You focused mostly on technology. How about the human aspect? How can we combat or identify insider threats on the human being? Wow. Not to plug Neuralink or Elon Musk, but I think that's kind of the level that we would need to get to before we can start dissecting human behavior. Excuse me. We have a lot of tools at our disposal that can detect human behavior from a network perspective. But at the end of the day, unless we can figure out a way to read minds, we can never tell what a person's intent is until they actually start to do something malicious or nefarious. Again, that's why it's important to be covered off from all angles, whether the misbehavior starts on the network or the misbehavior starts on an endpoint. We need to cover off all those angles until we can actually read minds and incorporate that into our security policy. Super, thank you question. Super question, thank you for asking. And I think we are coming to the end here, a couple of more. Appreciate all the fantastic questions being typed in. So in the beginning of the presentation, excuse me, you mentioned incidents where a disgruntled former employee used existing access to cause the incident. You view your products as part of a defense in-depth framework together with security policies where physical and electronic access is disallowed. Do your products provide any kind of automation and cross-checking for such scenarios? Great question, Simon. Let me break that down a little bit. Give me 2 seconds here. So do you view your products as part of a defense in-depth framework? Absolutely. And that goes back a couple of slides there to those round circles across the screen. Each one of those in itself is a different defense mechanism. And of course, the more you can leverage, the better you're going to be. But absolutely, there is no single line for OT security. OT security is inherently about defense by depth. And in fact, the Purdue reference architecture model is a great example of that, right? Segmentation. Keep your critical assets as far away as you can from things like the internet and unsecured networks by creating these different depth zones. So absolutely, we're a huge part of that defense in depth. Does your products provide any kind of automation and cross-checking? Yes, absolutely. One of the biggest strengths of our product is the fact that we have interoperability and integrations with a number of other tools, so we can bidirectionally share information. Not only can we make other tools smarter by sharing the information that we detect and discover, but conversely, we can also ingest information from other platforms to give us additional context and telemetry that we may not have. So absolutely, there's tons of specifics we can get into for that, Simon, but I like the way you're thinking, and thanks for taking us down that path. Is there any other presentation related to this topic? Not at this time. This is something new that we came out with late last year. So for a couple of months, we've been kind of going down this path and talking about insider threats. I'm not aware of anything else internally to Nozomi related to that topic. However, I do work closely with our marketing team, and I can tell you there's more coming out. So please stay tuned. We were kind of evaluating this to see if this is a topic that resonated with the public and with our user base. And based on this and previous engagements I've had with presenting this content, it definitely seems there is. So please stand by for more great content coming out of our marketing team. What methods are being used to discern between malicious employee versus a malicious outsider? Yeah, good question, Matt. And thanks for joining us. Hey, good to see you here. What methods are being used to discern between a malicious employee and a malicious outsider? So right now, that line is blurred. All we can tell for sure is that someone is malicious. Whether or not they're an employee or an outsider depends on how they're coming in. If we see an attack originate from a workstation sitting inside a control room, we've got a pretty good idea that it's a malicious employee. Whereas outsider attacks tend to originate from the network, and we're going to see other signs of infiltration, things like VPN access, remote access, and certain protocols and tools that we know malicious outsiders tend to use. So I guess the quick answer to that would be almost along the lines of breadcrumbs or fingerprints. If it's a malicious employee, there's definitely telltale signs that lead us to believe it's an insider from an employee perspective versus an outsider who leaves a different set of fingerprints and cookie crumbs. Would love to discuss this further with you, but thank you very much for bringing that up. Appreciate it. All right, keep it on rolling here. And I appreciate the questions, folks. These are fantastic. Keep them coming in. We do have a lot more time for the webinar. Happy to keep it going, answering Q&A. And of course, like I mentioned, stay tuned for more content coming out of our marketing and engineering teams. All right, so how looks like insider threats via shared credentials, OTIT, SSO to OT, from enterprise, authorization via IT. I'm not even sure I understand what that question is. I apologize. If you were the person that typed it in, maybe if you could give me a little bit more context. I'm simply not getting it. Talks about shared credentials, SSO to OT applications from an enterprise level. Yeah, not 100% sure. Sorry about that. If you could please expand on that a little bit, would be happy to circle back. How do you deal with the systems that do not accept EDR installation? Wow, solid. Yeah, that definitely happens from time to time. So if we do run into a situation where we simply can't get any type of sensor directly onto the endpoint, the game plan is generally to be able to observe network traffic coming directly off that device. So that means installing, excuse me, at layer two of the OSI model, not layer 2 of the Purdue model. But if we can connect and visualize that device and see its traffic coming out from the same source VLAN that it lives in, we have a very high chance of being able to spot any sort of misbehavior. The challenge comes when the sensor is located too far away from the system that we want to monitor, right? If we've got firewalls, gateways, routers, other networks in between, the more hops between our sensor and the device that we're trying to monitor, the more difficult it is to determine what's happening. So again, systems that are not able to accept EDR, our default best practice is to install a sensor as close to that device as possible so we can see it communicating at raw layer 2 and catch things like multicast and broadcast traffic, which gives us a lot of indicators. Great question. Thank you for asking. All right, next question from Maher. Do you see AI playing a role? Absolutely. Absolutely. And we've talked about that. AI is a critical part of managing alerts, things like false positives, and sifting through all the noise. I think we're going to see AI even more increasingly in the future distill large amounts of alerts down and help focus on the low-hanging fruit and what can I do to start mitigating this. So AI is already playing a role within our ecosystem. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Nozomi Vantage, and within Vantage, we've got Vantage IQ. And that's exactly what Vantage IQ is and does. It's AI that we've deployed looking specifically at your environment and data mining your alerts, your vulnerabilities coming up so we can understand exactly what's happening at a very personalized level. Based on what we see, we're using AI and machine learning then to come back to you with some proactive and predictive steps that you can take to, like I said, mitigate some of that low-hanging fruit or address any gaps or challenges that you may have, among many others. But great question. And we do have some other AI content from last year that a number of us did some presentations on. So if you are interested in that, please take a look, probably on our YouTube channel. I think those are out by now. But if not, you can certainly search Google and LinkedIn for Nozomi Networks AI. Thank you. All right, next question here. How many do we have left? Oh, awesome, tons. All right, you guys are getting your money's worth today. What are your recommendations for small water facilities who has no money to get cyber tools or people? Do Nozomi give any free tools for those small facilities? I believe other competitors do this. We've got options for every size environment. We're not believers in giving things away for free, but we have created value within our platform, and we do have entry points for every budget. It's a crawl, walk, run evolution. You're not going to do everything in one day and walk into the office and flip a switch and boom, you're fully protected. So we tend to see these as very phased deployments, with phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 having very defined activities. So it's easy for us to start small and very quickly build the use case and build the value that often funding gets released very shortly after. So we do have the ability to start small. Of course, water and wastewater facilities is a huge market for us. We've got a tremendous amount of business there, so we're not strangers to that industry at all. And I would encourage you to please reach out to anyone at Nozomi Networks, and we can start having conversations about what you folks need to start feeling a little more protected. Thank you for asking, though. Great question. Another question, can you share the slides? Yes, I believe we can. This webinar was recorded today, and I believe our marketing team is going to be releasing it onto YouTube very shortly, so you'll be able to see it again there. Additionally, yes, I believe we can get you the slides. Again, if you'd like to reach out to anyone at Nozomi and let them know you watched this webinar, we will definitely be able to help you out. Thank you for asking. Do you have any live videos from your lab with ransomware and Nozomi detection? Yes, tons. Do I have them handy right this second? No. But in all of my team, all of my engineering team, all the field guys, we have labs built out, and we have ransomware that we use on purpose to trigger the detection engines and show people how it works. So again, if possible, I would encourage you to please reach out to anyone on the Nozomi team, particularly anyone in the field engineering group, and we can all help you out and do a live demo for you. Additionally, I'm positive we've got stuff out there in videos. Over the years that I've been here, I've created a ton of content where we do use live ransomware and malware in the environment to show off the detection engine. So again, if you were to look through our YouTube page, I believe there's some great content there from myself and other folks. And if not, reach out to anyone from Nozomi. We're happy to do something live for you and show your team exactly what we can do. Thank you. All right, next question. Just keeping an eye on time here. Okay, we're doing good. About the integration of Nozomi with Allied Telesys Vista Manager, is there a roadmap? Xavier, I don't know off the top of my head on that one. I do spend a lot of time with our product and engineering teams, so I can certainly bring it up. And in fact, give me 20 seconds to just write this down. I haven't seen that one off the top of my head, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means I haven't had a chance to circle around to get the exposure yet. I know we do have a ton of customers that use Allied Telesys equipment, but whether or not we integrate with the manager is another question. In fact, just off the top of my head, I'm going to go ahead and say yes, based on the fact that I understand how our integration engine works and how we interact with other tools and platforms. My question back to you, and again, maybe we can continue this offline, but what sort of integration are you looking for? Are you looking for us to feed Vista Manager with information, or are you looking for us to ingest information from Vista Manager? So I think once we can understand a little bit more about the use case and what you're looking to achieve, I'm fairly confident the answer is yes. Again, based on 5 years of being here and doing a lot of stuff like that, that is off book. Thank you for your question, though. Fantastic. Appreciate it. All right. Another one. I attended S4 last February. Fantastic. And Michael, I hope to see you again this year. Nozomi Networks has a massive presence in Tampa coming up in about a month, so please feel free to drop by and see us there again. I attended S4 last February, where most of the OT manufacturers attended. Schneider Electric seemed to be taking a lead role partnership with CISA to protect legacy devices. The challenges they have is that the devices are often hidden behind a telco IP. Interesting. So one of the first things of note to tell you that's changed from last year is now Schneider Electric is an equity owner and partner with Nozomi. So with Schneider Electric in particular, we have some behind the scenes programs going on. I know the program you're talking about where they partnered with CISA regarding the legacy devices, challenges that they have. Devices are often hidden behind a telco IP. Not necessarily a huge problem for us. Again, we've got some mechanisms within the platform and the product that can understand NAT IPs. And once I understand that an IP is NATed, I've got some other options to be able to get to that actual device behind it. Not only that, generally our solution is an on-premise deployed solution, whether it's hardware or software or container or whatever it happens to be. So we will generally be on the customer side of a telco IP. Telco will have some kind of DMARC and they'll throw a router or some kind of device there. So forward looking out to the internet, everything hidden behind it is NATed and you see the telco IP. The way we tend to operate is we need to be on the other side of that gateway where I can again see that traffic at OSI layer 2, and then this problem goes away. So I hope that answered the question. It's all about smart architecture. And I would say the engineering team, field engineering team spends a lot of our time building out custom and bespoke architecture, mainly because within our customer base, we see so much diversity. We've got sample reference architectures, but in reality, very few people align to that. So oftentimes we run into situations and scenarios like this, where we're able to design an architecture that works for you and works for us. Hope that answered the question. And in fact, please reach out to anyone from Nozomi if we can help you a little bit more. Next question from Rahul: how to read encrypted malicious transmissions? The short answer to that is it depends on the protocol. There are ways that we can get to it. Sometimes we don't need to see the payload, but we can tell by destinations. We can look at DNS calls. We can see source destination, IPs, and ports. So if a machine is talking to a known malware domain or there's malicious transmissions headed out to somewhere on the internet, our threat intelligence team is very, very on top of that. I mentioned earlier that we're a CNA, a CVE naming authority. That is our entire security research team, our SecRes group, and our threat researchers in Europe that do nothing but curate our threat intelligence feed. And that includes things like malicious domains, bad traffic types, and so on and so on. So I hope that answered the question a little bit. But again, Rahul, please feel free to reach out to anyone from Nozomi, and we could double click on that a little bit more. All right, Michael again. Wow, keyboard warrior today, Mike. Thanks for all the great questions. All right, so they can see a device that is misconfigured and now exposed to the internet, but cannot see the company or location because the IP is leased from a telco. So again, that goes back to the fact that we need to be capturing data on the right side or the correct side of the gateway. Yeah, if I can see traffic on the other side of that telco gateway, if we can put in a sensor that's endpoint based, right? There might be a Windows machine back there. We can drop a sensor on that machine and problem goes away. If we have the ability to drop in a network-based sensor, we can also do the same thing. So again, that's an interesting architecture that you talk about, and we've got solutions for that. Please reach out, happy to share. How to automate hardening compliance in OT devices. So again, Rahul, great question. I see you're trying to catch up with Mike and have the record for most questions for this webinar. But in terms of automatic hardening compliance, that's a little bit of a challenge simply because of the device diversity that we run into and the types of hardening required for different types of devices. In terms of identifying what the steps are for hardening, we do a fantastic job at that. Things like Vantage IQ, things like our Vantage workbooks are going to help us identify where the low-hanging fruit is and where we can harden devices. In terms of automating it, there are third-party tools and platforms that we can integrate with to trigger a patch cycle or an update, but native to our Nozomi platform, we don't actually automate the hardening of devices. But again, through our integrations and interoperability, we can offer that in a different way. So I hope that answers the question. If not, please reach out. All right, Simon, can you describe how your products will help electric utilities help execute internal network and security monitoring to comply with NERC CIP 015-1? Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, that's a long answer. So what I'm going to ask you to do is right on our website, we actually have an entire section dedicated to NERC CIP compliance. And we show you exactly which NERC CIP parameters that we line up with. So 015-1, I'm pretty sure I saw it on there, but we've got a whole list of them. Maybe if I could ask Aaron from marketing who's listening to, there we go. If you click on the link below, Simon, hopefully that's a good start for you. But again, I would love to have a follow-up conversation because this is much larger than just a couple of minutes on a webinar. Thank you for asking. Great question. All right, Mike. CISA actually issues a subpoena to the telco to learn who owns the IP, which is not a great process. Any thoughts on how to better address this? No, not at the moment. You caught me off guard, and that's a space my head isn't in right now. But based on the volume of questions you have, I think it would be fantastic for you to actually engage with someone from the team. You've got a ton of great questions. We've got a ton of great answers, and hopefully we can meet in the middle somewhere. Thank you. Rahul, all right. Next 3 questions. Wow, you're really determined here. How can organizations effectively manage the vast amounts of data generated by IoT devices? Hey, that goes back to AI, right? We need something that's going to help us sift through the noise. Training network device tools like our Nozomi Guardian to understand baselining and profiling of devices is going to help a ton. And of course, we can do things to minimize the amount of data coming into the platform just based on severity, right? Do I need to know every time a device sends a packet? Probably not. Do I want to know if an IoT device sends a packet to somewhere that it shouldn't be? Yes. So it all comes down to properly training your rules. And the amount of data generated by IoT devices, again, we can tune that depending on what the objective is and what are we looking for. So there are tools and tips and tricks that we have for that, Rahul. Again, I would encourage you to please reach out to someone on the team, and we can show you in real time on the platform how this works. Next question from Rahul. How can organizations ensure compliance with data protection regulations in their IoT deployments? Well, all we can do is monitor and report from our perspective, right? We are a tool that's going to visualize the device communications. We're going to identify the devices, help with asset inventory, help with vulnerability management. But at the end of the day, there's nothing we can do to force a customer to become compliant. All we can do is monitor and suggest remediation actions. You know, it's kind of like that saying, you need to participate in your own recovery. There's only so much that we can do. And at the end of the day, it's a very collaborative effort between us and our user base. Thank you. Good question, though. Rahul, what are the key regulatory requirements for securing OT and IoT systems? That entirely depends on what industry you're in, right? The regulatory requirements for power generation, for instance, are very different than the regulatory requirements for a pipeline, are very different than the regulatory requirements for a hydro generation facility for power. So that really depends on what industry you're in. Someone earlier was talking about NERC CIP and some of the different NERC CIP requirements. So if you're in electricity, obviously NERC CIP is going to be very relevant, but different industries have different regulatory and compliance frameworks. And in fact, if you want to hit our website, we have a section on compliance that talks about some of the different regulatory frameworks that we align with. So hopefully that can point you in the right direction. Sean, yeah, we have a YouTube page. It is pretty cool. It's something new that we spun up last year. So it's still in its infancy, but that's where a lot of these webinars and others are going to end up eventually. So please What do they say? Give me a thumbs up and follow us for more content. Thank you. All right, Rahul, what is OT challenge for passive monitoring in 2025? Oh, sorry, question before that. How can organizations address the security challenges posed by legacy OT systems that were not designed with modern cybersecurity in mind? How can organizations address the security challenges? So there's only one option, and it's controls, right? Building controls around those legacy devices that there's nothing we can do to change them. They're always going to talk in unencrypted protocols or send information in clear text or whatever it happens to be. There's nothing at all that you can do from the device level. So therefore, we have no choice but to start implementing controls around these. This ties in very close with IEC 62443 or the Purdue reference architecture. This is why we segment devices to keep them as far away from possible, as far away as possible from harm. So unfortunately, there's nothing at the technology level that can help with that problem. This is a process challenge, and we need to build controls around these vulnerable devices. Hope that helps. Next question. What is OT challenge for passive monitoring in 2025? Ransomware, data breach, AI, converged. I'm not sure I understand that question. I apologize. Whoever typed that in, maybe if you could expand a little bit on that, I'd be happy to answer it, but I just don't get that question. Sorry. Next question, read negligent employees. You described as error prone, but most people are negligent at some point. Distracted, overwhelmed, etc. That realization is important. Recognizing insider threats is just human behavior. Absolutely. And that's the difference between a malicious insider and an accidental or inadvertent insider breach. And you got it bang on. The one I was trying to emphasize before is that there are some workers that are historically more prone to making mistakes than others. People that get distracted easily, people that multitask and do too many things that they shouldn't be doing. Your average employee absolutely is going to make a mistake here and there, but certainly not as much as a negligent insider. Hope that helps answer the question, or if that was just a comment. I saw a webinar about integration with ABB. Absolutely, ABB is a huge OEM vendor partner of ours. We do a tremendous amount of work securing ABB environments. And I don't know which webinar was that. I don't know if that was one of ours or one of ABB's, but thank you for pointing that out. All right, Rahul, how are we doing for time here? All right, I'm gonna have to cut this off in about maybe 2 or 3 minutes, but we'll see if we can get through a couple of more. What role do industry standards play in enhancing the security of OT and IoT systems, and how does Nozomi Networks help organizations? Yeah. Next question. You're gonna have to reach out, Rahul. These are great questions, but these are not things that I can just quickly hit in a minute. I do appreciate you researching and putting so many questions in. Where this is going now, the integration with ABB CSWP. I'm gonna make a note of that one as well. Dr. Hamil, I'm not 100% sure, or Dr. Hamdi, I'm not 100% sure on that one. I can check again. I do meet with product and engineering regularly. I don't have any ABB stuff on my plate right now, so that's why I'm not 100% sure, but let me make a note of that, and we will be sure to get back to you. Thank you. Simon, do your products provide asset management and configuration and change monitoring similar to Industrial Defender? If not, how well would your products for asset visibility integrate with centralized asset management? Absolutely. Asset management and configuration and change monitoring is a built-in core feature and functionality of the platform. We passively are able to detect the vast majority of devices just by observing them communicate and being able to decode, parse, and analyze the traffic from those protocols. We have full asset management, make, model, firmware, serial number. We even go so far as to look at things like line cards, nested modules, serially connected devices. So all of that involves asset management. Configuration and change monitoring, absolutely. Again, because we are watching the devices in real time, we can see configuration uploads, configuration downloads. We can observe logic changes. So absolutely, when it comes to asset management, configuration, and change monitoring, built-in functionality right out of the box. Thank you, Simon, appreciate it. Which vendor is possible to fully integrate with Nozomi for IPS, IDS via IEC 62443? FortiGate, TX1. FortiGate, yes. TX1, yes. Palo Alto, Checkpoint, Cisco. Pick your vendor. We have full integrations built in for most of the major firewall vendors and security vendors we see out there. Again, Nozomi Networks and our Guardian platform is an IDS platform, so we are detection only, which is why we have built in free integrations for all the security overlay tools. So if we spot malicious traffic or something that shouldn't be there, we can very easily talk to the nearest FortiGate firewall, for instance, and have it either block a link, block a node. We can get into NAC type functionality, knock someone off the network. Again, a lot of this control and response remediation is something that you need to be very careful about, particularly in OT networks. In IT, if I see something that shouldn't be there, no problem, flick it off the network. In OT, we need to make sure it's not part of a larger process that can have a much larger, more catastrophic effect. But in terms of what vendors can we do that with, I just listed them off, and those are also available listed on our website. Thank you. I think I got time for one more question, folks. And again, this is fantastic. I appreciate all of the effort you guys are putting in, asking these great questions. And in fact, this further validates the fact that each and every one of you should be reaching out and talk to us. You've got some great, unique insights and use cases that we're very eager to help solve. And in most cases, a lot of these, this is functionality that's already built into the product, and we've been doing this for over a decade across our 12,000 installations worldwide. So please do reach out. What are some ways to detect OT-based malware within the OT environment? Well, there's a number of ways to detect that. First off, if the malware is being delivered via the network, we are going to see that. Secondly, if malware is installed on a machine, as soon as it starts to do something, whether it's call out to a command and control server or do some sort of discovery of devices around it, we're going to detect that. The big key with the Nozomi platform is that we baseline and profile every single asset, link, and session that happens in real time. So as we understand what good looks like, the second anything happens that's outside of that baseline, we're going to start to create alerts and alarms on it. So it's actually not super difficult for us to detect that. You just need the right tools deployed in the right location of the network to help us do this in real time. Alternatively, our endpoint sensor, right? So if something is network originating, we can detect it using the Guardian and our network-based detection tools. If something originates on the endpoint, we can use things like our ARC endpoint sensor and be able to understand it immediately because we are catching it from the endpoint perspective. So I think that brings us to the conclusion of this session. And again, I'd like to thank everybody that tuned in, and especially those folks that have been hammering me with questions for about 35 minutes now. But it's been fantastic, and I appreciate it. Please do reach out to anyone on the Nozomi team. We are very happy to continue this conversation along. And I wish all of you a fantastic 2025. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you.